Peace and love to the family. Welcome again to the Corbin Mystery School. Peace and love to the family. Welcome again to the Corbin Mystery School, the home of the the home of the metaphysical and esoterical knowledge. Let me see that again and live in color. Peace and love to the family. Welcome to the Corbin Mystery School, the home of the metaphysical and esoteric knowledge. Usually people say if you're scared, go to church. Tonight, I'm saying if you are scared, get out of the church and come to the Corbin Mystery School. I thank y'all for watching. I present to you tonight, because it will be nighttime by the time you see this. I present to you black magic and the birth of the black Christian conversion. Oh my gosh. This is personal. This is personal. This is so personal. This is for the ones out there who be like black girl magic. For all my brothers who say, I am God, melanated man. To each race, including the black race, that says Black Lives Matter. This presentation will be from you, for you. Peace and love to the beautiful sister, Shirley Caesar. The beautiful mother, the matriarch, Shirley Caesar. I do not own the copyrights to that song, but blessings to that sister. I Remember Mama is one of my favorite songs. I do not own the copyrights of the scene from the film series, shout out to Jordan Peele, Lovecraft Country. If you haven't seen Lovecraft Country, I do believe it was on HBO. Please check it out. It was an amazing series. For those who have watched my work, my previous Darius Corbin channel, and this, The Mystery School, you see that I, with passion, guide my Christian, especially my Christian theologian, Orthodox family, Islamic too, but my Christian family, I passionately tell them that they are more than what their churches and that Holy Bible has been given them from decades, centuries. My biggest thing is bringing proof and not just saying F Jesus, forget Christians, and belittling them. Because I came from a Christian background. So my aim is not to bash Christians in their belief, but to let them know that the gnosis is in them. When Christ himself said that ye are gods, when the Bible said that the temple is inside of you, I am really just giving you a bigger picture of what the Bible is saying, living proof that Christ is walking in real time. Tonight's topic is going to be about black magic and how that us as Africans, us as melanated ones, us as the chosen ones, not my words, ancestral facts, that we have always had the knowledge and the magic and the supernatural components inside our body to manifest, create whatever we want. There has been certain races, entities on this planet that knew long ago, people, long ago, who the melanated people were. The X-Men, the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Avatars. And they had many years to deneutralize that certain race of melanated people, to the point that years now down the line, those people not only have no knowledge of who they once were, have no idea of the magic that is still in them, but still they have access to. But even worse is that they are scared of their own magic based on Christianity and religion, putting fear for them to worship something they have no connection with anyway. So tonight's presentation, as I always do with my channel, is going to be hard facts. I always tell people who ask me about certain things in life or death, when you choose this path of being awakened and being aware, or the gnosis, in the know, or knowing that you are greater, and that light bulb waking up inside your head that you are creator, it's going to get dark first. It's going to get real dark. A lot of people around you are going to look at you as crazy and are going to disassociate themselves with you. For those who have been through that, I tell you, do not fear, because your true magic is near. It's going to get dark. Choose wisely if this is the path you want, because it's a glorious path. But along the pathway, there will be tests, trials, and tribulations, and struggles and strives. Be prepared and be so all ready to enter. Tonight, I want to be reading from an article, and it's going to be called Religion and Resistance. And voodoo, black magic, Santeria, Obeah. These are all ancient magics that our ancestors not only had, but it was bestowed upon them. It was passed down from generation to generation. You're going to hear a story tonight, just one story. But then again, I might have another one, because with this, if you're a true listener, you truly want the truth of who you are. It doesn't matter what type of duration time is in this. If you got time to watch the Love and Hip Hop, and major respect to Mona Scott and everything she do, if you got time to watch the news and all the lies the media give you, then you got time to watch this. Straight up. This is your ancient history. This is your today history. This is what's going to get you through today and tomorrow. So without further ado, let's go. This article is going to be Religion and Resistance, Obeah, the Ultimate Resistance, by Alexandra Giralda, and that's Giralda. Are y'all ready? Y'all ready? They used to tell you, if you're scared, go to church. I'm telling you, if you're scared, get out of church and come to the Darius Corbin channel or the Darius Corbin Mystery School. Are you guys ready? It's time to listen up. Focus. If you got pen and pad, you're going to need that. You know how we do on my channel. All right, let's go in. Let's go in. The practice of harnessing supernatural forces and spirits for one's own personal use, known in some parts of Africa as Obeye. And that's Obeye. And it's an entity that lives within witches, is what it says. Known in some parts of Africa as Obeye, an entity that lives within witches, has taken on many names in the Caribbean islands, such as Shango, Trinidad, Santeria, Cuba, Voodoo or Voodoo, Haiti, and Juju, Bahamas, and of course Obeah, but this time spelled Obeah in Jamaica. Listen closely. Although African slaves usually practice Obeah for evil, and that's in quotes, or rather self-interest, instrumental purposes, this faith also aided them as a source of strength and clandestine resistance. And I'm going to read that again. Although African slaves usually practice Obeah for, and it says in quotes, evil or rather self-interested instrumental purposes, this faith, also added them as a source of strength and clandestine resistance. The practice of Obeah is the belief that one can use certain spirits or supernatural agents to work harm to the living or to call them off from such mischief. Generally, the British used the term Obeah to describe all slave acts and practices that were considered supernatural or evil in nature, such as rituals and fetishes. Modern historians believe that Obeah originated from the Ashanti and I want to make sure I'm saying this right. Coromantine, and that's spelled Koromantin. And once again, that's Ashanti or Coromantine. That's Koromantin tribes. The Ashanti or Coromantine tribes of Africa on the Gold Coast, and that imported slaves introduced it to the Caribbean as early as the mid 17th century. And let me read that again. Modern historians believe that the Obeah originated from the Ashanti and Coromantine tribes of Africa on the Gold Coast, and that imported slaves introduced it to the Caribbeans as early as the mid 17th century. Regardless of its use for evil or good, the Obeah men were treated with utmost respect and fear by all who met him. The Obeah man and woman played a prominent role in the Caribbean slave societies from the beginning of the slave trade. They functioned as community leaders and teachers of the African folks' cultural heritage. Many Africans believe that the Obeah man had within his power the ability to render someone invincible. Resuscitate, I want to make sure I get that word right. Resuscitate the dead, cure all diseases, protect a man from the consequences of his crimes, and cause great harm to anyone he wished. Excuse me, and I'm reading like off the bracket, so let me bring it down a little bit. Got a little something in the eye, but it's all good. I'm gonna make sure I read that again. Many Africans believe that the Obeah man had within his power the ability to render someone invincible, resuscitate the dead, cure all diseases, protect a man from the consequences of his crimes, and cause great harm to anyone he wished. Yet the Obeah man's most powerful gift was not his ability to steal people's shadows, as the act of Obeah or hexing was described, but his intricate knowledge of herbs and poisons. The term Obeah also suggested the word poison in the Caribbean plantation, this being the preferred and most effective tool that the practitioner of magic had at his disposal. Through the use of herbs and medicine, the Obeah man was able to miraculously cure or poison Obeah, a person to death. Considering the development and practices, bloodletting, of modern European medicine at the time, an ill person had much greater chance of survival by seeking out an Obeah man rather than a white physician. Let's read that again. Through the use of herbs and medicine, the Obeah man was able to miraculously cure or poison, and they have Obeah, a person to death. Considering the development and practices, bloodletting, of modern European medicine at the time, an ill person had much greater chance of survival by seeking out a Obeah man rather than a white physician. Let's continue on. Obeah was not only used as a source of power through its association with the supernatural, but with political power as well, specifically slave rebellions and the other forms of resistance in Jamaica. The Obeah man played a role as an inspirational leader who can entice his entourage, which might number in the thousands, to partake in resistance and rebellions. Because of their relation with, and I quote, evil, Obeah men were blamed for every mishap that fell upon a plantation or individual. So how did they manage to recruit so many followers? The lure of becoming the follower of an Obeah man was that once initiated into his or her group, you would become invulnerable to the white man and his weapons. Although you might appear slain, the Obeah man could, at his pleasure, restore the fallen body to life. This is the power that your ancient ancestors had, that through religions and certain Christianity, Orthodox beliefs have been shut down in your psyche. Y'all all right out there? We're just getting started. Obeah men played a central role in the conception and development of any serious attempt at rebellion. The Obeah man provided an ideological rallying point and sanctioned an open rebellion. He afforded a meeting place for leaders and followers so they could plan their revolts under the guise of religious gatherings. And he maintained the link between traditional African culture, which opposed colonial rule, and the Creole Caribbean-born slaves. Let me read that again. The Obeah man provided an ideological rallying point in sanctioning an open rebellion. He afforded a meeting place for leaders and followers so they could plan their revolts under the guise of religious gatherings. And he maintained the link between traditional African culture, listen, which opposed colonial rule, and the Creole Caribbean-born slaves. Wow, there was a distinction. By far, the most important contribution that the Obeah man made to the resistance of the slave system was his direct participation in the preparation of the insurrectionists for war. The Obeah man would first administer an oath. Listen to this. The Obeah man would first administer an oath to African rebels that would bind them to never reveal to anyone the identity of the insurgents of the plans of the rebellions. To do so would bring upon the individual an agonizing death. To do so would bring upon the individual an agonizing death. A white Jamaican planter named Edward Long best describes the ritual that the Obeah man initiated in order to administer the oaths. Now, what we're about to hear is an account from a white Jamaican slave owner on how the ancestors used to initiate and how they used to begin their process of working their magic. Listen to what Mr. Edward Long says. Their priest, or Obeah man, are the chief oracles in all weighty affairs. Whether of peace, war, or the pursuit of revenge, when assembled for the purpose of conspiracy, the Obeah man, after various ceremonies, draws a little blood from every one present. This is mixed in a bowl with gunpowder and grave dirt. The fetish or oath is administered by which they solemnly pledge themselves to inviolable secrecy, fidelity to their chiefs, and to wage perpetual war against their enemies. As a ratification of their sincerity, each person takes a cup of the mixture, and this finishes the solemn rite. Few or none of them have ever been known to violate this oath, or to decease from the full execution of it, even although several years may intervene. The Obeah man also created a power that supposedly possessed magical properties that would bestow upon the user of its protection from the white man's weapons. Long gives a detailed account of the capture of an Obeah man. Long gives a detailed account of the capture of an Obeah man who was known to have administered many of these rituals in Jamaica. And Edward Long once again says, in St. Mary's Parish, a check was fortunately given at one estate by surprising a famous Obeah man and priest. Much respected amongst his countrymen, he was an old Coromantin, and that's that word again, Coromantin, who with others of his profession had been a chief in counseling and instigating the credulous herd, to whom their priests administered a powder which being rubbed on their bodies was to make them invulnerable. They persuaded them into a belief that their general in the woods could not possibly be hurt by the white man, for that he caught all the bullets fired at him in his hand and hurled them back with a destruction to his foes. My gosh. Let me brighten up the screen a little bit. Obviously, this type of power in the hands of a slave made many plantation owners uneasy, to say the least. And family, before I go back in, you got to understand, we're talking the early and late, and actually late 1600s, early and mid 1700s. Remind yourself that the Declaration of Independence was formed in 1776. And these founding fathers were dealing with these ancestors who magic can shit down. They had a problem on their hand. Let's continue reading. Y'all all right out there? Thank you for watching. Obviously, this type of power in the hands of a slave made plantation owners uneasy, to say the least. Joseph Williams describes the plantation owners' views of the Africans from the earliest days of legislation in Jamaica. A serious source of danger to the peace of the colony was recognized to be ever present in the assemblies of slaves, where the old religious tribal dances were openly accompanied by drumming, which aroused the phantasm of Africans to such a degree as to endanger a general uprising. Did y'all hear that? And you know how much music influenced us. Remember back in the day with Chuck D and Public Enemy? Fight the power, you got to fight the power that be, and how much uproar. Even the peaceful ones. We shall, but I'm speaking as far as the power. Think about the young brother Pop Smoke when his energy came in hip hop. How everybody, even the Jewish brothers in New York, wooing out there. Music is us. Our power is in music. I'm gonna read that again. Thank y'all for rocking with me. I told you we don't play around in the Darius Corbin Mystery School. Class is in session. Let me read that again. Joseph Williams describes the plantation owners' view of the Africans from the earliest days of legislation in Jamaica. And I quote, a serious source of danger to the peace of the colony was recognized to be ever present in the assemblies of slaves, where the old religious tribal dances were openly accompanied by drumming, which aroused the phantasm of Africans to such a degree as to endanger a general uprising. End quote. Before long, it was discovered that a second cause of danger, this time a personal one to master and slave alike, was to be traced to the secret poisonings that was ever becoming more common. Listen, beginning in 1684, wow, various laws were enacted in Jamaica as precaution against slave rebellion. Later, planter legislators enacted laws banning nocturnal gatherings. Did y'all hear that? They were banning people for having celebrations at nighttime. Our people. Black Lives Matter. I bet they do. I bet they do. Beginning in 1684, various laws were enacted in Jamaica as a precaution against slave rebellion. Later, planter legislators enacted laws banning nocturnal gatherings and religious practices. In 1816, a law was passed recognizing the coupled danger present from revolt and obeah. And I quote, if there shall be found in the possession of any slave any poisonous drugs, pounded glass, parrot's beak, dog's teeth, alligator's teeth, or other materials notoriously used in the practice of obeah or witchcraft, such slave upon conviction shall be liable to suffer transportation from the island, deportation. The slaves in Jamaica, according to plantation owners, were primitive, and unintelligent, according to the slave owners. Listen to what I said. The slaves in Jamaica, according to plantation owners, were primitive and unintelligent savages. Yet, they managed to resist the planters' effort to control and exploit them at every opportunity. The laws of Jamaica are themselves testaments to the efficient and meticulous planning of slaves in their attempt to rebel against, and I quote, the white man's institution. It had taken the planters more than 130 years from the first law that recognized the threat of rebellion, 1684, until they implemented a law that recognized the tripartite association between slave rebellion, obeah, and poison. So, in layman's terms, they're saying that it took the slave owners 130 years to correlate the obeah magic, the black magic, and the rebellion. The understanding it was all part of the same beauty. It had taken the planters more than 130 years from the first law that recognized the threat of rebellion, which was 1684, until they implemented a law that recognized the tripartite association between slave rebellion, obeah and poisonings. As the years passed and plantation owners began to suspect that the increase in deaths by poisonings was attributed was attributed to slaves, they enacted harsher legislations that ranged from mandatory searches of the slave's domicile, and I quote, every master or mistress or overseer of a family in the island shall cause all slave houses to be diligently and effectively searched once every 14 days, end quote, to sentencing slaves to the ultimate punishment, which is death. One of these particular laws making the death penalty a mandatory punishment was enacted in the late 17th century. And I quote, whereas slaves have of late attempted to destroy several people, as well, white as black, by poison, the said slaves or slaves together with their accessories, as well before as after the fact, being slaves and convicted thereof, shall be adjudged guilty of murder, as if the party or parties that took or shall take the same had died, and shall be condemned to suffer death by hanging, burning, or such other way or means as to said justice and freeholders shall seem most convenient. Death by poison began to take on a form of covert rebellion amongst those slaves who had rancor and access to their plantation owners or overseers. Most of the slaves who wished to poison someone but lacked the knowledge turned to the obeah man of the region to execute the act. These types of personal services usually require a form of consideration. Obeah men were usually compensated for their services by their followers in the form of, and I quote, donations, food, shelter, or money. However, at times, the obeah man simply asked for the procurer pledge to carry out, and I quote, a favor at a later date. By accumulating a large amount of favors throughout a plantation or region, the obeah man gained personal power and was able to execute his wishes with ease. The obeah man usually did not directly administer the poison to a victim. He simply called in one of his favors under the guise that he was applying a charm and ordered that individual to administer whatever he asked to the food of the ill-fated slave or overseer. Clearly, obeah men were important in the rousing, organization, and execution of slave revolts and slave resistance in general. Whites feared their power to evoke a rebellion, and enslaved blacks were petrified at the thought of falling victim to their magic. Let me read that again. Clearly, obeah men were important in the rousing, organization, and execution of slave revolts and slave resistance in general. Whites feared their power to invoke a rebellion, and enslaved blacks were petrified at the thought of falling victim to their magic. Even though these men had many enemies, they were usually never betrayed by one of their own because he was recognized as an important figure in the slave society of the time. The Obeah man played various roles simultaneously. He was a healer and the executioner. He was loved and feared. He was father to all and demon to many. These men, under the seemingly innocent guise of, and I quote, medicine men, came to accumulate power and respect that rivaled that of the largest plantation owner. Even today in Jamaica, children still tremble at the thought of going to visit the Obeah man. And where we at? 32? I usually give you an hour. I usually give you an hour. I want to say this because a lot of us, a lot of my family come from Virginia. Virginia's connected to North Carolina. You go down South Georgia. A lot of y'all know about voodoo. A lot of us know that terminology to be called roots. Roots. You might hear somebody say, look, that person been rooted. Somebody put something in their drink or whatnot. So when you equate those type of things like you just heard, and the old people back in the day, like that person been rooted, you're not going to want to in your church support anything that has to do with people being controlled by certain elements, certain magic, especially when you're telling people that your fear, your control, your worship should be to this entity, this Jehovah or Yahweh. But in ancient times, our people didn't have to worry about no Yahweh, no God, because they had their own magic they was working with. I want people to fully understand in the age of Aquarius that religion, the Christian religion, as far as Western civilization, is only 2,000 years old. You have people living in the islands that have never been touched before. When I mean touched, people have never really been able to approach them and the islands that they live over 60,000 years. These people have no idea, no knowledge, no gnosis about no Holy Bible, no Yahweh, no Jehovah. They go off of the ancient teachings that they have been going off of for 60,000 plus years, and they are still living. You have the Western civilization. Now we speak trying to take these islands, destroy them and the people, take them people who never know anything about being slaves or none of that, and put them into these foreign places so they can be controlled, murdered, raped, and they can take their land and make malls and amusement parks. That's why I showed you that clip from earlier. Because once you get our energy together through surviving through pain and torture that we've been through in this lifetime, you're going to understand that your power is more than what it is. I can't wait till y'all hear this presentation I'm doing. The woman, her mystery, her origins, her divine nature. It's really gonna go down. Like I said, I usually give y'all a good hour, so let's keep going. Y'all all right out there? I told you, it gets dark, it gets deep. Black Lives Matter. Black Girl Magic. All right. But when it's time to use it, everybody want to go back into church. Everybody want to say the man's crazy. Corbin different. It's a little bit too deep, is what they say. But yet ask me, how did I see Egypt? How did you rise above all this when you were at your lowest? And then when I tell them, it gets a little bit too dark and scary and creepy for them. How sad. How sad. Listen to this. There's a big word they're using right now in the political world: insurgencies. January 6th. We had those group of a lot of them were European, a few melanated ones, if you can't even call them, a few of those, a few familiars that went inside in January 6th to the Capitol and did what they did. They call them insurgents. So we're gonna have to look at the dictionary of that word insurgents, but rebels is what I'm, revolt, rebellious is what I'm thinking that word correlates with. But for those historians who are still watching at 36 minutes, I thank you. I want you to research Tacky's Rebellion. Now they give you Nat Turner, they give you the beautiful sister Harriet Tubman, who represents Maryland. Shout out to Maryland, Eastern Shore. But Tacky's Rebellion was a part of the Obeah Magic, Obeah, that we were talking about in the previous story. So I'm going to read a little bit of this, and maybe we'll stop at an hour. But I told you, we in here today. Y'all see that? Can y'all see that? The Jamaican slave, the Jamaican slave insurgency that transformed the world. What? I never heard of that, Water. The Jamaican slave insurgency that transformed the world. Tacky's Rebellion. TACK' Rebellion. And we're going to jump in. A lot of this may sound confusing, but I'm jumping in. I want you to, from the moment I gave you that video to the moment I gave you that last story to this moment, this is all a movie, a true movie. You getting your power back. So I'm going to rush it to your subconscious. Only the plotters truly knew if their plans. Now, mind you, this is straight back to the slaves and the magic of Obeah and Tacky's Rebellion. Only the plotters truly knew if their plans had called for a general uprising from the beginning. The colonists were guessing based on evidence garnered from torture, and historians have little more to go on than their speculations. Were the events in St. Mary's, Kingston, St. Thomas in the east, and Westmoreland part of a general insurrection? Something important is at stake in the answer to this question. Historians sometimes view slave conspiracy trials as evidence of panic projections by slaveholders upon helpless victims. Another perspective casts the slaves' actions as mostly reactive responses to immediate circumstances and opportunities rather than as the outcome of careful organizing. By contrast, the first named historian to interpret Tacky's revolt was Edward Long. And remind you, we just got finished listening to some work on the white Jamaican slave owner. Let me read that again. By contrast, the first named historian to interpret Tacky's revolt was Edward Long. Edward Long agreed with his fellow colonists that the rebellion had been carefully planned. He says, these circumstances show the great extent of the conspiracy, the strict correspondence which had been carried on by the Coromantines in every quarter of the island, and their almost incredible secrecy in the forming of their plan of insurrection. For it appeared in evidence that the first eruption in St. Mary's was a matter preconcerted and known to all the chief men in different districts, and the secret was probably confided to some hundreds for several months before the blow was struck. For long, Tacky was their, and I quote, chief man at the head of the conspiracy, but Long's account is an unreliable guide. Most importantly, he offers an Arius chronology of events. An Arius chronology of events. That means there's some error in his work. Wanting to show an island-wide conspiracy, he depicted the events in St. Mary's Parish, as simultaneously with later events in Westmoreland, extending the timeline for the St. Mary's uprising and making it appear to last well beyond the Westmoreland insurrection. At least one detail of the account makes this misrepresentation seem willful. Long states that it was Admiral Charles Holmes who dispatched the naval vessels to the north side of the island, despite the fact that Holmes did not arrive at Jamaica until May 13, weeks after Tacky was killed and the rebels had dispersed. Long surely knew this, but distorting the sequence of events in the way had the effect of making the whole affair seem that it was indeed Tacky's revolt. So to make that in layman's terms, Tacky took a lot of the story and just dramatized it, prolonged it to a certain extent. This theory gave the insurrection an identifiable scapegoat whom Long could blame and belittle all at once. So he put all the blame on Tacky when what they're trying to say is this has been going on for a while. It's just like what the cops did with Larry Hoover or whatnot, to a certain extent, in major respect, or a freeway Ricky Ross. The uprising has been going on for a while, but they picked one person to blame it on, and Tacky was that one at the time. This theory gave the insurrection a identifiable scapegoat whom Long could blame and belittle all at once. Acknowledging Tacky as a young man of good stature, and I quote, acknowledging Tacky as and I quote, a young man of good stature and well made, he called him handsome, but rather of an effeminate than manly cast. Mocking and demising black sexuality was an important part of establishing racial hierarchy. Did y'all hear that? Damn, did y'all hear that? 43 minutes in, did y'all hear that? We talk about the late 1600s all the way to the late 1700s, and the Declaration of Independence was formed in 1776 while all this was going on. Look up the Tacky's Rebellion, Tackys, to all my historians. This was a brother from Jamaica in the islands. Him and other people, they say, allegedly conspired to have a bunch of white slave owners murdered. It was by the thousands. Slave owners was murdered. Let me read that again slowly. And I thank y'all who's still watching. I can read fast sometimes, and I know sometimes, but I'm going to bring it back so you can understand, so we can appreciate this work together. So I thank my true scholars, my true historians, my true people out there who's still rocking with me and getting this information. Because we're raising new teachers, new scholars in this age of Aquarius. Our new generation needs to hear this so they don't be in fear every time they see a black man shot down. They should be using their magic every time they're talking about poisoning you. You should have your own knowledge of who you are so you can use your power against the people who are trying to use their power against you. I'm going to read that again. This theory gave the insurrection an identifiable scapegoat who Long could blame and belittle all at once, acknowledging Tacky, and I quote, as a young man of good stature and well made, end quote. He called him, quote, handsome, but rather of an effeminate, almost I guess in a female type of way, rather than a manly cast. Mocking and demonizing, listen to this, family. Mocking and demonizing, listen, family. Mocking and demonizing black sexuality was an important part of establishing racial hierarchy. And Long hastened to add that Tacky, and I quote, had flattered himself with the hope of obtaining, among other fruits of victory, the lieutenant governor's lady for his concubine, end quote. That lady being Edward Long's eldest sister. In Long's estimation, Tacky's elevation stemmed not from his leadership abilities or military experience, but from his supposed resemblance to, and I quote, some favorite leader of their nation in Africa, end quote. Most likely, Tacky had himself been a leader in Africa, but for Long, this was merely a sign of Coromantes, credulity. He compared Tacky's followers to some Africans who had once encountered the bronze statue of a glad. Let me slow that down. He compared Tacky's followers to some Africans who had once encountered the bronze statue of a gladiator erected on a local plantation, which, and I quote, the Coromantes no sooner beheld than they were almost ready to fall down and adore it, end quote. With Tacky at the head of uprising, Long had devised an intelligible narrative of the violence that conveniently discounted the strategic implications he most feared. According to him, the uprising resulted from a concerted effort, but it was doomed by African intrinsic faults. 116 yet, as he knew from the attack on Fort Haldane to Tacky's death in the Rocky Valley upriver from Downs Cove. Tacky revolt lasted only 1 week. What Blaine's long desire to subsub the entire rebellion within a chronological that elevates the primary of the events in St. Mary. Other sources too conspire to highlight the importance of the earliest clashes. The April 14 letter from a gentleman at St. Mary's was the first and only coherently plotted account. The ones that followed display the irregularity and confusion of the colonists' predicament. Dread governor their experience. By May, they were growing wild with fright as they ginned up the docket of African savagery. It is difficult to tell which stories came from captured rebels and which sprang from slaveholders' imagination, especially when the specter of cannibalism appeared in print. Colonists read the rebels at Ballast Valleys, and I quote, cut off the overseer's head, put his blood in a calabash, mixed gunpowder with it, and ate their plantains, dipped in it as they did by every white man they killed. In short, their savage barbarity can scarcely be paralleled. If there had indeed been a blood sacrifice at Ballast Valley, this report made it seem as if the rebels were taking some Holy Communion with bananas instead of bread. The story made the sacrament all more heinous by comparing the Coromantese to Catholic Protestant Britain's foremost global adversaries, and contributed to the sense that the colony was besieged from within and without by enemies at once familiar and strange. With each successive discovery of new unrest, the slaveholders grew more fearful and bewildered. Suddenly, the uprising seemed to be happening everywhere at once. The shocking reminder that power did not guarantee security drove colonists wild with fear. Over the next several weeks, lasting into July, they discovered several more conspiracies in the commercial capital. Colonial officials deepened their investigation into the circumstances surrounding the war-token mahogany sword. They learned that the Kingston's Coromantes had railed around a woman named Cuba, and her name is Cubah, whom they elevated, and I quote, to the rank of royalty. This will go perfect with my presentation next time. And dubbed her the Queen of Kingston. Like other Africans, she claimed territory for herself and her followers in the knowledge that the boundaries of her dominion were drawn more by people's loyalty than by land surveyors. At meetings, she had sat in state under canopy with a sort of robe on her shoulders and a crown upon her head. Now look at Queen Elizabeth. This is before Queen Elizabeth time, mind you. Mind you that the crown that Queen Elizabeth rocks, Queen Elizabeth II, I believe, was taken from Africa and put on her head. Did you know that? Don't you know that? Don't you know that? You didn't know that? The crown that is on Queen Elizabeth's head was taken from Africa. Like other Africans, she claimed territory for herself and her followers with the knowledge that the boundaries of her dominion were drawn more by people's loyalties than by land surveyors. At meetings, she had sat in state under a canopy with a sort of robe on her shoulders and a crown upon her head, adopting the paraphernalia of power. And I quote, end quote, she might have known on the Gold Coast. Adapting the paraphernalia of power she might have known on the Gold Coast. Upon the intelligence, the government seized Cuba and ordered her to be transported from the island. They can't stand a melanated person with power. Under the intelligence, the government seized Cuba and ordered her to be transported from the island. In the Vale of Luadas in St. John's Parish, Coromantes belonging to the Speaker of the House of Assembly, Charles Price, had agreed to ravage the estates, and murder the white men there. Quote, end quote. 3 people familiar with the plan betrayed the rebels. It's always 1 or 2 or 3. 3 people familiar. Black Judas. 3 people familiar with the plan betrayed the rebels, and the ringleaders, quote, were taken up upon the conviction, executed. Others who turned evidence were transported off the islands. Thus, the whole of this bloody scheme was providently frustrated. More plots were afoot in the parishes of St. Dorothy's, Hanover, and Clarendon, where Edward Long owned his estate. Throughout this time, Henry Moore kept martial law in effect, and the military remained on the march all over the island. Fear transported the slaveholders into a delirious fever dream from which they would not soon recover. And this is 16th, 17th century. We didn't even get to the 18th century, where at this time they were giving you the Holy Bible. Are you starting to understand now what I'm trying to ask you out there? Is it starting to make sense now? I'm giving you a timeline. 16th, 17th century, when they started to bring slaves down here, they were still working in magic. They gave you the Nat Turner story in respect to him because it was safe. But we had ancestors working in magic. And these Europeans put into laws to make sure that they could not use their magic. Certain things they did to females back then prevented them from bringing certain babies, especially the males, especially the females as well. So these babies would not know knowledge of their power. Now fast forward to the 1800s, where now you have the Holy Bible saying that slaves should worship their owners as God. Come on, man. Y'all still not frustrated? Y'all still going to church? You are the temple. The temple's beside you. Come on, family. Wake up, wake up, wake up! How you gonna be able, listen, how are you gonna stop a Christ walking being as myself? I am willing to die about this. You take me out of here, there will be more like me that will wake the people up to who they are. Death what? Death is a rites of passage. What are you fearing? Fear mongle? Fear transported the slaveholders into a delirious fever dream from which they would not soon recover. So, even if everything I've been saying been a little bit too fast or too confusing, well, Corbin, what was the results of these black people using their magic? How did the slave owners feel? If you couldn't understand none of what I said, well, the answer to that was fear transported the slaveholders into a delirious. Slave owners went crazy because of the stuff they experienced with this black magic that is within us right now, that is dormant because of religion. Well, how did the slave owners take this magic that these black people was giving them? Fear transported the slaveholders into a delirious fever dream from which they would not, till this day, soon recover. Possibly the experience of fright and alarm during the uprising sent some of them into a fugue state. Damn! Declaration of Independence, huh? Are y'all starting to get it now? If not, then leave my channel. Don't ever come back. You ain't got to go college to understand what I'm talking about, to understand the words that are coming out of my mouth. Possibly the experience of fright and alarm during the uprising sent some of them into a fugue state in which linear temporality had lost some of its purchase. They had lost the plot. The narrative they pieced together at the start of the rebellion represented the most linear description they could manage until Long sat down a decade later in London to reconstruct the sequence. Let me say this again, and I gotta see how we gotta not just me, but we gotta research and see how connected was Edward Long to the founding fathers and the Declaration of Independence. Long sat down a decade later in London to reconstruct the sequence. Oh, we gotta change this narrative, family. Because these black motherfuckers are whooping our ass with this magic. Jarvis says, insane. Partly for this reason and partly because of the events that occurred later in the 1760s. And for my historians, by raising hands, I can see you. What year was the Declaration of Independence? What year did America get their independence? And the answer is, what is July 4th, 1776? I'm going to read that part again. Long sat down a decade later in London to reconstruct the sequence, aka change the narrative. Partly for this reason and partly because of events that occurred later in the 1760s, the St. Mary's Revolt established an enduring narrative pattern providing an intelligible origin and knowable characters, with the colonists' actions bending a discernible story arc from beginning to end. The slaveholders were paranoid, and their slaves really were out to get them. Sometimes these two facts could exist independently. The events of 1760 united them together. The cause of the insurrection were probably more broadly distributed and far more contingent than Long and the other slaveholders knew. Even so, whether or not these revolts were the result of a single grand design, they were not disconnected from each other nor merely opportunistic. The rebels coincide around affiliations of language, regional identification, and military verve. If each uprising had its own inspiration, each also took careful account of local conditions, potential connections, and broader opportunities. In St. Mary's, the path of insurgency strongly suggests a defined objective: control or destruction of the commercial zone along the rivers. Yet, if what happened in St. Mary's Parish could be called Tacky's revolt, it was only one conflict with a larger war, an unfolding uprising itself, encompassed by wars within wars. And in final, in the cascading series of events initiated by the rebels in St. Mary's, we see how African militancy derived from the entanglements of empire, trade, and war across the Atlantic. Tacky's revolt was smaller and less significant than Long and subsequent historians have supposed, only because the slave war it advanced was larger and more consequential. And I quote, "A more dangerous or troublesome affair I was never engaged in all my life," end quote, wrote Zachary Bailey about the St. Mary's insurrection. And still, the Coromantee War was closer to beginning than its end. Woo! Savage. My beautiful people, I have no shame in telling you that I am the Son of the Mother God. I am Christ walking. I'm not telling you that I'm Jesus. Yeshua came here 2,000 years ago to try to tell you, to listen to him. You let a lot of Europeans and a lot of ancient ones taint the true word of Christ. For you out there who say Black Lives Matter, for you out there who talk about black girl magic, for you out there who talk about I am God, well, why don't you do your research on Samian Toko? Do your research on Henrietta Lacks. Definitely do your research on Samian Toko and Simon Kimbangu. Samian, you know how to spell that. Simone. Simone. Samian Toko. Simon Kimbangu. Who are those two gentlemen? Well, Christ and John the Baptist in modern times. You need to do your research. So right now in modern times in 2021, we are here and they're talking about the people who went into the Capitol and they call them insurgents that went to the Capitol on January 6th. Light work, maybe. Now imagine, listen carefully. This is just a what if. Marvel did a what if. I'm doing a what if. Imagine a race of people who are asleep, who fell asleep eons ago. And this gets personal. Imagine a race of people that fell asleep years ago. They knew they were going to fall asleep years ago. They became dormant and dormant. And they were asleep for many millions of years and eons. They are now waking up. Imagine a power of evildoers knowing that these people one day will wake up. Don't you think they would kill as many of them off, silence as many of them they could, demonize their sexuality as many times as they could to prevent them from uprising again, especially after what they had to go through in the 16th and 17th centuries? Take away their spiritual and magical gnosis and give them a book that tells them to worship a God and then worship the slaves who have tortured, raped them, and robbed them, disease filled them, and tell them to worship them slaves as they would worship the God. Everything around God, the true supreme father with the mother, is based on pure love. So how can you have a God that is vicious and vengeful and jealous? Do you see where the narrative is fucked up? Wake up, people, because we are here now. Thank you for watching. Corbin, out. Oh, stay tuned for the next presentation. Woman, her origin, her divineness, her mystery. Can't wait. Peace.